Hi, and welcome to Project Delivery Insights. Today, we'll go through Convergence Planning and Convergence Plans. The target audience for this presentation are those who are already in a project environment and running large, complex plans, as I will refer to a lot of planning techniques, as well as various planning and controlling terminology. However, this can still serve as a means of appreciation to those who are studying project management or have heard the term convergence planning. Today, I want to talk about convergence planning or convergence plans. An interesting topic. This came about as a result of a student forum where planning techniques were being discussed, and I talked about convergence planning as an added stream within the planning, monitoring, and control principles that allow the project drive some key deliverables without the need of continuous intervention by the planning team or planner. For those of you in very large scale projects or in some medium scale projects, you're very accustomed to a contract master schedule. You're very accustomed to baseline schedules where a lot of the monitoring and control is effectively done by the project services team, your planner, your planner, your cost controller, your contracts team, and if effectively notifying you about CPIs, KPIs, and progress on the project. For me, there's an element of added overlay to that where you can look at a different stream where you can take certain elements of the plan and look at the key deliverables and drive those deliverables through a different form within the project where the engineering teams, the procurement teams, key disciplines within the project have a clear overview of the milestone requirements to drive without always being buried in a very large plan. And this is sort of what we talked about at the forum, and it intrigued a lot of people. And I thought to myself, it will be an opportunity for me to obviously try and imbibe or express what I know to the forum. And I hope this gives you the opportunity to be able to learn from my understanding of project convergence planning. So I split this presentation into two parts, with part one focused on what a convergence plan is and how to develop one, while part two is presented in another video showing you how to maintain the plan and examples of how to build up a convergence plan. So clearly, what is a convergence plan? Or in this case, I've termed it the project convergence planning. So we talk about the principle, and then it will eventually go to the plan. The convergence plan, as I see it, is a project management tool that uses project deliverables as a key way of monitoring and communicating progress in a clear and highly visible way. Now, key things that we need to establish here are, monitoring and communicating, as well as highly visible. Key things here, and look at those words and understand. For those of you who are very focused on monitoring and control, this effectively allows you that insight without going into your baseline large plan to just have a snapshot of where you are at one point in time. Communicating that information to the forum and driving that through your various stakeholders and putting it in a visible way that everybody can understand. And I'll get to that when I come to that at some point. Think of the plan as a go, no-go situation. We all lead up towards, this gate, this portal, where the information is driven through and the actualization of various steps are considered, and whether these steps have been considered, actualized to allow you then go through the gate. So think about it. And remember this term, go, no go. Many projects typically use that, either within a waterfall methodology or within a agile environment. These terms are understood. So for those of you who are in the project world, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Some considerations and things you have to consider. We talk about critical path activities, and we talk about work breakdown structures. These are key things because many of you understand the critical path activities, and is effectively one of the things that the Convergence Plan drives you to is analyzing those critical path activities. What are they? Do we understand them? And how can we draw down the deliverables from them? Looking at the WBS and how it's currently structured, and whether we need to take the WBS into consideration when building up the Convergence Plan. The project identifies gates that lead or converge towards project completion. As I mentioned before, the no-go, the go-no-go, the same gate philosophy would apply. Within each gate, deliverables are defined, including deliverable dates and persons responsible. So we talk about getting a gate, we talk about understanding the deliverables in that gate, and we talk about a deliverable delivery date, and we effectively have an actionee to be able to drive that deliverable through. Regular review of the deliverables allows early detection of late delivery and opportunity to recover. Many of you have had to go through recovery plans, and if you have, then you know fully well that they can be painful processes. But what we need to do is effectively have something that triggers off early enough before we get to a state of despair, such that we already know what we need to do to recover, or have enough float to be able to do that. And that's why the Convergence Plan works hand in hand with the contract master schedule. What do we mean by gates? I guess that's, the image there, I guess, speaks for itself. I won't necessarily go into too much detail, but effectively, you're converging. You're getting to a point where the information has to be able to go through the gate. Will the gatekeeper effectively allow you go? Think of it as a toll. Where deliverables are the payment and the gate is not opened until deliverables are complete. Only when all deliverables within a gate are complete can the gate be considered as complete. Gates do not need to be independent of each other. It is not always necessary to complete one gate before you start or complete another. So gates can be parallel. Gates can be running concurrently, gates can be back-to-back, gates can be sequential, but they don't have to be back-to-back. That's the point. But you can analyze that through your critical path activities. So what do we mean by deliverables? When we look back at the critical path activities, and you look at your plan, you're always talking about activities and how those activities are interdependent and how they run concurrent, and the activities drive the plan, which is effectively the way you would drive any plan. But a convergence plan is structured just that you want to have something tangible that you can touch, something that is a physical deliverable that once it has been achieved, it allows the next thing to be done. In some cases, that could be a basis of design document. In some cases, that could be the approved for construction drawings. In some cases, it could be a mobilization plan. In some cases, it could be the first component of a series of components that has to be delivered before anything else can actually run within the whole product element itself. So we talk about deliverables as tangible output of an activity and not the activity itself. The plan talks about the activity, while the convergence plan talks about tangible output. It must be clearly defined and understood by all. And this is important from the project manager himself to make the project team clearly understand, what their respective deliverables are at any one point in time, and give them that visual understanding, flash understanding that this is your remit. Must have an identified owner and date for completion. So again, we go back. Tangible, remember this element of it, because put that in your head. It has to be a document, a report, a product, a component, something physically done to allow the next stage occur. Benefits of a convergence plan, or benefits of convergence planning. So again, I want to just, before I go into that, talk about the whole monitoring and control process and the planning process. For many of you who are in large scale process projects, who have dashboard systems and things that bring you your CPI understanding every morning, or your SPI understanding, and your cost controllers are looking at planned cost against actual. You're constantly tracking your baseline activity against where you currently are, and whether you're dipping in and out of float, or whether you have an early start or late finish. That's great. But the concept of convergence planning is focused on taking those concepts of convergence of standard planning activities and being able to draw them down into clear activity profiles or deliverable profiles that a team can understand. So despite conventional planning tools, we often miss early warning signs that deliverables will be late, resulting in late deliverables elsewhere. And many of you have been in this position before, and I'm sure you always wish that something triggered us to tell us, we're going to be late. I'm not saying the plan doesn't, but this is sort of a lower tier element that allows people to understand where they are at any one point in time. Convergence planning focuses on deliverables, allowing early detection of late delivery and implementation of recovery plans. I talked about this earlier on, where I talked about the focus being the deliverables and early detection. If I can on a daily basis look at a plan and look at the deliverables and establish where I am at any one point in time, it allows me as a project manager to either sit back and go, I'm on track, or something flags up in my mindset that I have a problem. I need to drill down into the procurement world. I need to drill down into that one sub-supplier element in the procurement plan. I need to look at the engineering plan currently and go, these documents are going to trigger off a late delivery of something tomorrow. So that's how we look at the convergence plan as being that early detection tool. The Convergence Plan provides an easy to understand illustration of progress that can be displayed in the project area when it can be seen by the project team and readily communicated to stakeholders. So I go back to something I mentioned earlier on about monitoring, about communicating, about being highly visible. So the Convergence Plan needs to sit in the project environment where it's seen by everyone, understood by everyone, and watered down to something that can be legible and understood rather than buried in a 40-page plan. It complements, but does not replace the conventional plan. I think I've said this over and over again, that it is not there to replace your construct master schedule. It is there as a tool to aid your understanding of where you are at any one point in time. Major application is typically waterfall methodologies, but can be adopted in principle within the agile environment. Now, many of you who typically run, an agile project, you're looking at Scrum from a Scrum management point of view, from a sprint point of view. The concept of convergence planning is there, but is being tracked slightly differently. My experience is primarily around the waterfall methodology, but the thing within the agile environment is that you will still hear the term go, no go. But also I'm quite happy to be able to take feedback at the end of this video, for my colleagues who are more proficient in the agile environment. But in my brief awareness and working within that environment, the concepts have also been noted and utilized. A successful project may be viewed as a set of validated deliverables. Have we achieved and got it? Yes. If we have, tick. Let's move on. So we've talked about the convergence plan, we've talked about the principles, we've talked about the benefits of it right now. Let's look at how we build one up. So, considerations. Now, the example I've used here is based on an offshore pipeline installation project. So we talk about going offshore, you talk about vessels, you talk about large procurement, you talk about fabrication, you talk about manufacturing, you talk about engineering, you talk about offshore activities, you have to talk about installation, you talk about commissioning, you talk about purchase of the pipeline, of the line pipe, you talk about potential purchase of an umbilical. These are major elements that make up the activities associated with a set project, and that's what I'm using as an example here. You can adapt this to anything that you think of, but within that same project, I talk about packages. So if we talked about the pipeline fabrication and the umbilical manufacture as packages within the plan, set WBSs if you look at it. I talked about the WBS previously, talked about the critical path. It's an understanding of how those two are currently made up. You've got to think about links and interdependencies. Critical path activities that have certain starting or certain elements that are linked. How are they linked? Where are they linked? Why are they linked? This has to be understood. Engage your project planners, your lead engineers, your product managers, your supply chain team. It's important that you bring these departments of your project into the forum whilst you develop the convergence plan. Think about a large room, because for us to do this, we need a big whiteboard, we need a number of key people within the room, and we're going to sit down and brainstorm looking at the contract master schedule and drawing down from that. And as we go through that, as I always tell myself and my students, we've always got to go what, why, when, who. What, why, when, who. So let's talk about work packs and talk about the first step as I would look at it. So we talked about the room, we talked about the whiteboard, we talked about somewhere that we can work on, and we need lots of sticky notes. Now, again, all this depends on the size of the project. Some of this could be done within a short period in a small room with a number of people. But when you have a number of key stakeholders, it's always good to be able to have a big space that you can put your thoughts on. As a large group, identify the main project work packages and target date for completion. So here I've termed package 1, pipeline. I've termed package 2, umbilical. Split yourself into smaller groups, one for each work pack. Ensure that the people in the groups are knowledgeable about the work packages and the key stakeholders are included. Gate 2, we identify the gates. So again, the brainstorming process is telling us that, through that critical path activity, we're identifying these key milestones that need to be looked at. We're identifying key deliverables that fall out of that critical path that we have to flow down. And through that, immediately, we're sussing out from that what our gate profile potentially will be. And here I'm giving you typical examples or indicative. You can build up in terms of what your program is, what your plan is, what your project is. You don't have to follow this, but I'm giving you that. If you think about building a pipeline tomorrow, you've got to think about procuring the pipeline. You've got to think about manufacturing the pipeline. You've got to think about installing the pipeline. You've got to think about tying in the pipeline. You've got to think about testing the pipeline. And you may think about the as-built documentation at the end. So indicative, apply this to your own project. Step 3, identify the deliverables. So we've gone through the whole brainstorming process. We've identified the gates as we see it. And now it's a case of looking at the tangible, and I use the word again, tangible activities that we have to consider. Remember, deliverables are tangible, products, not activities. Step 4, identify deliverable dates. Now, this is something I do, right? And when I look at the plan, I go, based on the current plan, I will have a date in there. That date, depending on how you have planned the project, may have an element of float in it. So, do I want to push that activity to the very late period in terms of a late start or a late finish? No. I mean, the thing I've driven my team with is is looking at that baseline data as provided, looking at the applicable float, testing that deliverable with my engineering team, testing it with my procurement team in terms of confidence, and establishing a realistic date, which is usually before the baseline date or usually before the late completion date, such that I have a clear date that if I miss it, I have the opportunity to recover. In most cases, I would always try and drive it towards the early completion date, such that I still have a wider float to manage. But again, these are target dates that we at the project level then take. And should we not meet it for any reason, we have the opportunity to recover before we go into major recovery plans. Again, this is my thought process and how I manage my teams, but you may have a different view to that. Step 5. So we assign actions and methods of validation. So if we go from left to right, we talk about the deliverables and we talk about the gates themselves. We talk about the dates associated with delivering those deliverables and going through the gate process. We talk about the owner, and we talk about now as we go through the whole validation process, we talk about who the approver is. Okay, so we have a basis of design document. That's fine. Has it been approved by the project by the engineering manager? Has it been approved by the project manager? Yes. How has that been validated? You've gone through your document control cycle. It's been reviewed by a number of key individuals in the group. And we now look at the status and understand, have we got green? Are we amber? Or are we red? I'm not going to tell you the color coding, but effectively, you are going to use that sort of color coding philosophy that allows give you an understanding of where you are. Now you can be amber because you've achieved a certain level or percentage in terms of delivery, and you're not near the actual deadline date right now, so you could constantly be running amber. If you've not achieved any actual tangible time and you're sort of at a very close period towards the delivery date and nothing tangible is coming, these elements are flagged red, and okay, look, these then take a priority in the conversation with the team to understand what needs to be done in a timely manner. So this brings me to the conclusion of part 1 of this series. I appreciate it's quite short, but I didn't want to keep this going on because I could, if given the opportunity to speak, and I didn't want to do that. Clearly, a lot of what I've talked about right now, as I've mentioned previously, is trying to trigger the thought process in what you're trying to do. Key things: this is not a baseline plan. This is not the plan. This is a lower level plan that is a fallout of the main plan that the project and key stakeholders have clear visibility of what their critical deliverables are, such that it is the focal point for them. The engineering team know what their key deliverables are out with the main plan, and they are tracking that separately and reporting progress. The good thing about that is that they can report physical progress on the convergence plan, which could feed into the main contract master schedule. The procurement team can decide, maybe we don't need a procurement plan. Maybe we could drive the procurement plan within the convergence plan. Another thought process. Complete left wing in terms of thinking. However, it does work. It does work. I have seen it where project team go, no, convergence plan will govern sort of our planning techniques, and we can build on that as much as they want, where they're quite clear. For your engineer, I mentioned the engineering, you talk about the procurement, major fabrication, where is that currently sitting? Where are the deliverables for fabricators? Are they constantly being tracked? Are they arrived? Are they in the yard? Where is the actual physical fabrication in terms of a tangible piece? Where are you in terms of component build? Where are you in terms of software development or sub-level software that needs to be complete before something else cannot kick in. You know, if you're dealing with mechatronic systems, for instance, and you're talking about control pods and control systems and how those need to be evolved, software and code needs to be written first of all before you can then imbibe them into a system, and then they can activate the cylinders, you know, things like that. And I'm putting all this into context for yourself for you to visualize, and that's the key thing. Visualization is the most important thing. And as we move into part 2, we will start looking at sort of how we maintain the plan, and I'll give you a bit of an extract of how I've put together a plan in the past. So look forward to seeing you in part 2. Thank you.